Ago, an Israeli soldier pointed his rifle at a CNN news crew in the occupied West Bank. He shouted at them to stop. He ordered them to sit down. And 73 seconds later, another soldier came up from behind, grabbed the CNN cameraman by the neck, put him in a chokehold, and slammed him to the ground. His camera was destroyed. The entire crew was detained for 2 hours. Their crime was documenting what was happening in a Palestinian village where Israeli settlers had just set up an illegal outpost. That is not a rumor. That is not an allegation from some anonymous source. That is CNN's own report. Their own journalist, Jeremy Diamond, wrote the story. Their own cameraman, Cyril Theofilos, was the one who was choked. And after it happened, Theofilos said this violence is just a symptom of what happens every day in the West Bank. And I need you to hear what else those soldiers said while they had the CNN crew on the ground. They said that all of the West Bank belongs to Israel and the Jewish people. They talked about revenge. They echoed the language of the most extreme members of the Israeli government. And when they were done, they let the CNN crew go, but did nothing about the illegal settler outpost that started the whole thing. That outpost is still there. The settlers are still there. And a 75-year-old Palestinian man named Abdullah Daragma is lying in a hospital bed with a fractured skull, broken facial bones, and missing teeth because those same settlers beat him in his own home. And here is something that tells you just how far this has gone. Israel's own military chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, called the rising settler violence morally and ethically unacceptable. That is not me saying it. That is the head of the Israeli military saying it, and still nothing changes. Still no one is arrested, still no outpost is removed, and still the soldiers who are supposed to enforce the law are instead enforcing the settlers' agenda. Let me put this in context, because what happened to that CNN crew is not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern that the world is not paying enough attention to. The Committee to Protect Journalists, which is the most respected press freedom organization in the world, released a report earlier this year confirming that 2025 was the deadliest year for journalists in recorded history. 129 journalists and media workers were killed worldwide last year. Israel was responsible for 2/3 of those deaths. More than 60% of the journalists Israel killed were Palestinians reporting from Gaza. And since October 7th, 2023, the total number of journalists killed has reached at least 254. That number includes reporters from Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, Iran, and Israel itself. Let me say that differently so you understand the scale. Israel has killed more journalists than any government in the world since the Committee to Protect Journalists began keeping records in 1992. More than any dictatorship, more than any war zone, more than any regime on earth. And the Watson Institute at Brown University published a finding that should stun every American who believes in a free press. More journalists have been killed in this conflict than in the American Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the wars in Yugoslavia, and the war in Afghanistan combined. All of those wars, all of those decades, all of those battlefields. And this single conflict has surpassed them all. And just yesterday, 3 more journalists were killed in Lebanon when an Israeli strike hit a clearly marked press vehicle. The car had press markings on it. The journalists were driving on a road, and a missile hit them anyway. Lebanon's president called it a violation of the most basic rules of international law. The Committee to Protect Journalists has demanded independent investigations into every one of these killings. Not a single person has been held accountable for any of them, not one. In over 2.5 years, with 254 dead journalists, 0 accountability. I said it yesterday on my account. Israel has killed hundreds of journalists who tried to expose the actions committed by IDF soldiers. And I asked a question that apparently makes people uncomfortable. If America condemns attacks against Israel, why can America not condemn attacks against innocent people carried out by a government we fund with billions of dollars every year? That is not a radical question. That is common sense. We send $3.8 billion a year to Israel. American taxpayers fund that military. And when that military points a rifle at a CNN camera crew and chokes their cameraman on video, the American government says nothing. When 254 journalists are killed, the American government says nothing. When a 75-year-old man has his skull fractured in his own home by settlers who face no consequences, the American government says nothing. I shared a video yesterday by J.P. Sears where he sarcastically apologized for criticizing Israel. His point was simple, and it is a point that millions of Americans understand but are afraid to say out loud. Anyone who questions what is being done with our tax dollars gets labeled. Anyone who asks why children are dying in Gaza, Iran, and Lebanon gets called names designed to shut them up. Anyone who suggests that the government we fund by the billions should be held to the same standard we hold everyone else gets treated like an enemy of the state. The label changes depending on who you are. For me, it was traitor. For journalists, it is a bullet. For ordinary Americans, it is social pressure, career threats, and public shaming. But the purpose is always the same: make them stop talking. Well, I am not going to be quiet about it. I was not quiet when Trump called me a traitor for releasing the Epstein files. I was not quiet when they told me to fall in line on the Iran war. I was not quiet when my own party refused to fund health care while spending $2 billion a day on bombs. And I am not going to be quiet when a CNN crew gets choked for doing their job and the entire United States Congress pretends it did not happen. I know what it feels like to be silenced. When I spoke up about the Epstein files, the President of the United States called me a traitor. When I spoke up about health care costs, my own party turned its back on me. When I refused to support the Iran war, the White House called me a quitter. Trump's words led to direct death threats against my son. I told the president, I told Vice President Vance. The response I got from Trump was not very nice. That is what happens when you tell the truth in Washington. They do not debate you. They do not prove you wrong. They just try to make you afraid. And when fear does not work, they take your camera, or worse. The free press is not the enemy. The free press is the only thing standing between the public and the governments that lie to them. When you silence the press, you silence the truth. And when 254 journalists are dead and a CNN cameraman is choked on video and nobody in Washington says a word, then the truth is already losing. I do not care what party you belong to. Is not a partisan question. It is a human question. And right now, the answer coming from Washington is silence. And silence, when you have the power to speak, is complicity. The camera is the only weapon civilians have. A Palestinian man in that village